Okay, so we've looked at how integral helps us to map the whole of experience, the whole of the universe, interior and exterior. So now let's look at how these perspectives grow. I'm going to use the term evolve a lot here because what we know from all sorts of fields, certainly in education, that human development happens through developmental continua. So I'm going to use the terms develop, I'm going to use the terms evolve to basically describe the fact that over time, individuals and collectives and really the whole universe is developing, growing into more and more complexity along certain developmental continua. So this is a big idea and something that we'll have to go into in further detail. But the core idea here is that in any aspect of our human experience, what it is to be human, we are developing. We come into the world and then we grow up. This is most noticeable in children as we see them go through developmental stages. This is something that is very well mapped, very well documented. It's something that you don't need to be an educator to understand. Many people who have been parents, who are parents, understand the idea of milestones, and that as children grow, their perspectives get fuller and fuller. Initially, they only see their own perspective, and then over time, they're able to see the perspectives of others, and that development continues through adolescence, and then for people who choose to continue to grow through adulthood. So recent human developmental scientists and researchers are understanding that that same kind of development that we see in children and adolescents continues in adulthood. It just needs to be chosen. So we can kind of get off the bus at any stage through our development so that when we're adults, we may still have perspectives or capacities that haven't evolved or developed as far. And that's where we see a lot of diversity even among the adult population. This is actually because some people have chosen to continue to stretch themselves and put themselves in situations where they are learning and continuing to grow and develop, and other people have decided that a certain status quo is where they are going to stop. And really, there's not two groups, those who develop and those who don't. Generally speaking, it's that we choose to continue to develop in certain parts of our capacities, and we choose to be okay with the status quo in others. And this is where we get huge diversity amongst the population. And it's important to, again here, to use the term map, right? Human development can be mapped, and when we look at it on a piece of paper, there is generally kind of an arrow, and it usually goes up because of our bias towards up being better. But essentially, it is a map of the general thrust of how a human tends to develop through particular areas. And so it's important not to confuse the map with the territory. So this mapping technique that Integral allows us to do is really powerful, but we have to be careful that we don't mistake the map for the territory. It's a way of helping us to understand the world, but it is not the world. That said, we can use this to help us understand how somebody may have developed quite fully in one area of who they are, but not in another. So we have all sorts of stereotypical examples of this. We have the absent-minded professor at the university who might be able to hold in their head, formulas that would take up a whole wall of chalkboards, and yet they forget whether or not they packed a lunch today, or they're unable to express basic emotional self-understanding to their loved ones, that kind of thing. Or we have experiences like the stereotypical car salesman, the used car salesman, where they are incredibly developed in terms of their interpersonal skills and their ability to form and develop relationships, but maybe have low moral development, and so have no problem at all ripping somebody off or selling them a lemon. These are stereotypes, and I understand that, of course. But they're illustrating a point, which is that just because we are highly developed in one area does not mean we are in another. And history is full of people who may be charismatic leaders who have tremendous ability to sway the people around them, and yet are very poorly developed in some other really important ways. And so we end up with catastrophes and a lot of confusion and wringing of our hands about how is this possible. So we need to understand that human development happens in all of these ways. And in the positive, we also have people who are incredibly developed in terms of their somatic intelligence, their ability to move their bodies, dancers, actors, and so on, singers with their voices and being able to channel emotion, and who are also very decent people and are also very skilled at X, Y, and Z. So the point here is that there is a tremendous diversity, and more importantly, that this is something that is available to us all, that we can develop or continue to develop through our lives in all of these different domains if we become aware of them, if we become conscious of places that we do want to grow. When we put energy there, that's what happens. We do grow. The simplest way of understanding these different developmental lines is the idea of multiple intelligences. So that's a pretty strong baseline in terms of how we can understand the different areas of a human being and the different ways that we can develop or not. Integral theory only includes those multiple intelligences that have been researched, that have a body of work behind them in terms of how we can map them, because they are backed up with a body of evidence that we can point to and that we can use to assess where we are and where we would next want to develop into. Another aspect to this that I will just touch on briefly, because it is really a huge part of this larger map, but it's an important thing to have in terms of the overview, is that just as in humans individually, we progress through certain stages of development. So the 2-year-old becomes the 5-year-old, becomes the 12-year-old, and the different abilities and complexity that comes online at each of these stages. Humanity itself and our civilizations also have progressed through these stages. So just as a child starts with an egocentric position and then grows into a perspective where they are able to see a larger world that they interact with, but that feeling that they still have absolute control over the universe hasn't completely dissipated, where they believe in things like if they think something, they can make something happen with their minds, or that if they think something bad might happen, or if they're watching a baseball game and they think if they hold their breath, maybe a home run will come. That happens on an individual level, but we can go back to our human history to a place where that was the cutting edge of humanity, where we all believed that, because we were collectively moving through this development into a more complex perspective. Then we move from that into rational ages, and so on. So we'll come back to that idea, but it is important to understand that this mapping of development is mirrored, that our collective development is mirrored to our individual development. And as we explore those topics more fully, it is important to understand that each level of development that we move into, that we evolve into, again, individually or collectively, that we don't throw out the previous. That in Integral we say this is to transcend and include. And so when I'm a very young child, I have those oral anal drives you might know from psychology, where I experience everything as being something that relate through my mouth. And that is an incredibly important drive, because that's how we eat. That's how we sustain our bodies. And so when we move into a fuller understanding of who we are as human beings, we don't want to throw out that ability to sustain ourselves, but we don't want to be stuck in that paradigm either. And so what happens is we keep certain aspects of that paradigm, let go of the things that need to be let go of, and we move into a fuller understanding that includes the previous. And so as individuals and as society, as we collectively grow, we need to make sure that we are being healthy in keeping certain aspects, but then welcoming fuller ways of being and understanding. And this is exactly where we get into issues around so-called culture wars. It is the fact that when we have somebody who is coming from one perspective that may be able to see things that somebody from another perspective who hasn't seen those things yet, each side sees their perspective, because that's their reality, as the truth, capital T truth. And so for the quote-unquote lower perspective, take that term advisedly, please, they simply can't understand where the person who is now taking on more complex perspectives is coming from. But the person from the more complex perspectives has forgotten, A, what it's like to have that previous perspective, and then also forgets that some aspects of that perspective are really important to a complete view. This is one of the biggest keys for me that has unlocked my understanding of the world and these so-called culture wars. And I look forward to exploring that more fully with you. So you can see the complexity of the theory, but also really how powerful it can be. It helps us understand the fullness of our experience, and also how our experience grows and develops and becomes fuller and fuller. And so I look forward to exploring this material more with you and looking at how we can use it to practically enhance our own lives and to help solve the problems that we face collectively.